So, you can't believe a word I say. I promised a 10-minute talk, followed by a 15-minute talk, which turned into a 12-minute talk, followed by this 30-minute talk. Who knows what will follow? I'll attempt to do better in my predictive abilities in the future. For those that would like to read as I talk, I shall post a link in the description and eventually learn how to insert timestamps as well. This talk is about meaning and knowing, with a little bit of value thrown in, and is the second in a series which describes as best I can the reframe of key concepts that I have developed in my attempt to make sense of the world that didn't make sense to me as it had been described to me by others, when a lot of what I experienced in life didn't match society's descriptions. How do we know what we know, and how do we derive meaning and value is one of my basic questions. As best as I can ascertain, our basis of understanding is largely done by experiencing contrast, then distinguishing differences. Then through comparing the differences our sensual senses have experienced, we then construct a framework of understanding for our mental senses to make sense of. This conclusion, once made, needs to be in alignment with our previous conclusions to form a cohesive worldview, which we inhabit as our perception of reality. These experiences and conclusions are built upon layer throughout a lifetime as we conceive and understand self, other, and what is. With our understanding waxing and waning over time, the degree we can handle any incongruency or incompatibility in our framework of our perception of reality and how we go about rectifying it is another of life's mysteries waiting to be investigated further. As can be seen from this description, the only thing I can be sure of is that I experience and everything that follows is my interpretation, which includes my interpretation of what I am. As usual, I'm aware any explanation I come up with is only ever a partial explanation, with only sufficient congruency to satisfy my need for a degree of certainty, with certainty being one of our built-in lusts. Another of our built-in lusts is understanding. This lust requires satisfaction to whatever degree our thinking and feelings demand. The success of this is relative to our current and past experiences, along with accumulated conclusions and our imagined futures up to present time. To that end, if God is a metaphor for an individual's locus of control, what is a metaphor? My answer is comparing one thing to another for comparison and explanation's sake, to see similarities and differences and extrapolate from them further meaning. There are numerous comparative words similar to metaphor, to name a few: analogy, simile, opposites, and antigen. Get the gist? Or as my mother used to say, exactly the same, only different. Like 1 to 0, people to computers, accept to reject, positive to negative, good to bad, off to on, or love to fear. So a metaphor compares a perceived reality to an imagined equivalency for contrast to extract meaning. For example, while our perception can't extract much meaning from a totally white view until it is contrasted with a contrasting dot, a pixel, or a contrasting border, we also can't perceive any other color until it is contrasted with another color, whether it's just imagined or actually physically seen. Once contrast is detected and the processes of extracting or divining meaning are then activated. This disregards any notion of what a brain or consciousness may be doing while entertaining memories and instincts. Finally, to my way of thinking, a metaphor is a mental tool used comparing two contrasting perceptions while attempting to extract meaning. While a computer's computation can be reduced to ones and zeros, and I can reduce human thinking to accept and reject, to my way of thinking at least, the fact remains, despite many a similarity, we are not computers and they are not us, although both function better when graduations between the differing data inputs can be recognized and distinguished in finer detail. For the preparation of this data to be processed into thoughts and emotions or computations, it needs to be such so that when the detail is communicated to another person or device, or indeed to be utilized within our own internal dialogue or to be communicated to another living creature, it will work better than an off-on switch if it has then been processed thus. It would be few, if any, that fully understand the workings of all computers' codes, and fewer by magnitudes, which would be represented by 0, that fully knew the programming of self, other, and what is. I believe a metaphor is a basic building block of human perception, thought, and communication. Before the first metaphor was born, a half metaphor was required. In a single person's mind, this would have occurred when a single perception was turned into a symbol. Then as perceptions and symbols multiplied, language was born. From this, one person's need to communicate with others would dictate the need to get another person to focus on a single object. This could have been achieved via gesture, dance, or verbal sound. Once this association had been achieved, the way was open to more comparisons and further development of language and code, driving more thought and computation. I believe that whatever this process is, it is subjective. It is a subjective mode of being, and any conclusions, understandings, or beliefs that result from it remain subjective. No thought or feeling can be objective. They would be better described as better described as based on core beliefs, knowledge, or feelings. The development of the metaphor has played a huge part in revolutionizing and increasing evolution's rapidity over time, at least our perception of it, or the thinking that can be expressed through the development of its use. From this, we develop meaning and much more, while utilizing brain power along with the instincts encoded throughout our body and any other power sources that drive us, whether they be metaphorical or perceived physical. Meaning and knowing. Three things I know for sure are: one, I at times experience. That's the first thing. While at other times I'm oblivious of experience. That's the second thing. So I know when I'm unconscious. So I know when I'm conscious, but only know I have been unconscious after the fact. The third thing I know for sure is that there are unknown and known degrees and types of separation between my knowing and my not knowing my own experience. All conclusions beyond that are interpretations of my experience. Herein lies the great mystery of how we turn experience into meaning. It is through that which we call thinking and feeling, which acts as a great multiplier and subtractor, along with the many unknown algorithms included in the processes of turning experience into meaning. So what I'm saying is we only have an inkling of how we turn experience into meaning, but nonetheless we manage to function as human beings do. Further to this, from experience and interpretation, as well as through metaphor, comparison, and contrast, meaning is derived through processes that we think we are beginning to understand, with some believing they know more than they do, often from the standpoint of believing they know self better than others do. Sorry about that, I lost my place. So I'll start from here again. Further to this, from experience and interpretation, as well as through metaphor, comparison, and contrast, meaning is derived through processes that we think we're beginning to understand, with some believing they know more than they do, often from the standpoint of believing they know self better than others do. This may be a bit of a red herring, but for the moment, let's accept sometimes others know our actions better than we know ourselves. Assuming there is enough correct in the ill-described description of comprehension which I attempt to express throughout this talk, we move from that basic aspect of perception to when it gets more complicated by adding more data than a single contrast. When more contrast is experienced, and the need arises to divide these variances into differing types and degrees of separation and label every perception, thought, feeling, or even our symbols with new updated symbols. The end result of this processing is what we have come to know as language, which contains within it the meanings, values, and so-called knowledge we have assigned to our experience thus far. Locked within these words we have co-created is what powers the expansion or minimization of further thought to a large extent, until such time as they are unlocked by further experience and different conclusions. One further thing I think I know for sure is that such perception and cognition is dependent on the existence of self, other, and what is. Although what is may well be able to exist without humans existing when none are able to perceive it, an open question. How the process of cognition happens in actuality is beyond my capability of full description or full comprehension, but I can accept what I've described so far as a distinct possibility and a good starting point for further knowing. From our limited ability of perception and communication, we face many an apparent paradox and conundrum, of which many are not even apparent to us, because we have not yet developed sufficient perception or cognitive ability, which we may progressively obtain through further development of physical, mechanical, and electronical apparatus and senses, or through further development of the power of our own senses, thoughts, and feelings. Because of our limited understanding, we are often left having a need to transition from being stuck in a paradox or conundrum to moving forward into action via the degree of free will that is available to us, to make decisions for survival or satisfaction's sake, often achieved by rearranging and reframing the meanings and values we have created this far, using whatever mental tools we have at hand. One factor worth keeping in mind, I believe, is the confusion caused by incongruency of thought. It is one of the mechanisms that is utilized in hypnosis. This needs to be taken into account and understood better than my current understanding, so that it can be guarded against. Both the self-hypnosis and the hypnosis directed by others, and the hypnosis that occurs just through the act of living. All these need understanding as best as we can. Another example of our need to continually examine our own thinking is contained within this quote. In the natural process of growth in the human mind, belief does not follow proof, but springs up apart from and independent of it. And an immature intelligence believes first and proves, if indeed it ever seeks proof, afterwards. That quote was from George Grote in his writings on Plato and the other companions of Socrates. However, I would say that while many of thought may pop into mind without any knowledge of where it came from, eventually each individual aligns their thoughts to be congruent with previous thinking, while within this process, a testing regime that satisfies their current needs is created. And as needs change, so does the test regime, all in the blink of an eye. By its very nature, this process is open to much distortion with numerous influences, with many deluded that they only think scientifically, logically, and accurately, and believe they can always identify when they stray. Despite the fact it is easier to see incongruency in others' thinking than our own, there are many groupthink incongruency that goes undetected along with the personal ones, because we also have the ability to ignore incongruency, the ability to ignore many incoherencies within our thinking by denying the incongruencies itself by an unconscious act of denial. It could be said everything is an illusion, from the reality we exist in to the perception of it. However, we do experience a solid reality with real consequence, and it's up to each and everyone to navigate and resolve our differing perceptions and interpretations for the benefit of self, other, and what is. Within the reality that we can see, touch, and feel, taste, smell, imagine, and experience, it is in the knowing of our experience that the illusion we create resides. It is within these confines we create our futures to the degree we are capable. Knowing is the illusion of reality, instructed by self, other, and what is. It is through knowing we perceive reality. While some of what I've just described may appear somewhat like circular reasoning, it's worth noting that the word meta, as used in metadata, means self-referential. I'm beginning to believe that all our thinking is self-referential to self, other, and what is. It is when our focus is too much on one of those individualizations that our thinking becomes unbalanced, because we start ignoring the interconnections that are inherent in self, other, and what is. This comprehensive balancing act is complicated by all the unknown relevancies we think we know but don't, along with the compounding fact that by necessity, to function as a human being, we must detach from self, other, and what is to varying degrees, dependent upon circumstance. Comparing contrast layer upon layer, we derive meaning, value, and purpose. The totality of this process is unknown to me or us, although we call, and this was God itself. Although we call it thinking, experience, feeling, and interpretation, from this we derive satisfaction or dissatisfaction to whatever degree we are capable of. The meanings we conclude from these experiences we use for the governing of self, other, and what is. The degree of success is related to how well we can predict consequences and how we react when our predictions prove to be false, and how long it takes to recognize our mistaken predictive beliefs. Then our fresh conclusions dictate our futures, including our future values and their consequences. The price of the pursuit of truth is the need to be prepared to reconstruct meaning, purpose, and values to maintain a balance of what is best for self, other, and what is, while not destroying what it is we are trying to maintain, our very existence. One of our higher priorities, don't you think? Although some would argue with that, and that's a bit of a worry, don't you think? In summation of more conclusions, given the fragility of our knowing, knowledge is the belief believed to be true. Knowledge is a belief believed to be true. The only thing we know for certain is experience. And from then on, it's all about interpretation with only a limited amount of awareness of how and why these processes are taking place. Assumed truth is that which can be matched to reality. Assumed reality is all that which can be matched to experience or existence. From this, we all must individually and collectively interpret our experiences, all the while utilizing our memory of what is and projecting our imagination into the future as we decide what can be. Some say we are a pattern recognition machine. I am highlighting that we're also a pattern differentiating life form with the ability to extract meaning from our experience. This is a long way from describing how we go about generating or recognizing meaning. However, we obviously both generate meaning and recognize it. Although we apparently have difficulty recognizing at times we are often consuming our own generation, and as in the values we have co-created. Value is not an objective thing, but it is the result of a subjective mode of being known as evaluating. Attaching it to a purpose, it still remains subjective, self-generated. Nothing is good nor bad other than thinking makes it so. There is nothing new under the sun but a reinterpretation of what can be. Wonder where all that came from. Shakespeare in the Bible recently, anyone? In further summary, we are left navigating the primordial soup of existence with word salad or language guacamole as our guide, and it's up to us to make the most of it for the benefit of self, other, and what is, by taking the best of our past and present experience to co-create a better future, forgiving our past mistakes, knowing that forgiveness is giving up past or present expectations and developing more accurate and helpful expectation based on fresh experience and more helpful conclusions, leading to a better feelings, which lead to better actions, which are always answerable to self, other, and what is. We are also better served by thinking more about our realistic future than about where we imagine we have been, not in an attempt to erase our past, but to build a better future to whatever degree we can co-create it. Spirit is something we construct throughout our life. Whether it endures after life is an open question. Even if our spirit's influence may appear to wax and wane throughout our lifetime, to what degree it influences future life through genetics and many unknowns that drive us is also an open question. However, it certainly influences the life we lead. Further to this, my definition of spirit is the essence of something or someone perceived through the senses and cognition, with each individual reaching their own conclusion about their higher authority, their perceived locus of control. I believe the ultimate in politics and religion is about governance of self, other, and what is, finding answers for the betterment of all as best can be done. In conclusion, faith, which many think they need to disavow, faith is what holds our beliefs together. We require a degree of faith in this framework of constructed knowledge. The degree of faith required always relevant to circumstance and consequence, driven by a habitual need for a degree of certainty, which may not be directly linked to current circumstances. How's that for a paradoxical conundrum? I believe building this construct is best done in consultation with diverse others, with the best interest of self, other, and what is as a guiding template. I would suggest the Brisbane Unitarian Universalist Congregation present 7 principles and 6 sources would serve well in conjunction with that role, along with any other wisdom we learn along the way, all of which needs to be appropriately evaluated by each individual. As this talk is getting longer than I anticipated, I think I'll do a separate review of the Brisbane Unitarian Universalist principles and sources, along with sharing further my definition of love, which is basically love equals acceptance. But as we know, nothing is absolute. Next talk will be about truth, purpose, and value, or whatever I decide. Thank you for listening.